Dr. Hayes had been practicing medicine for 41 years. He had delivered thousands of babies, witnessed countless miracles, and seen medical anomalies that defied explanation. But as he stared at the blood test results in his trembling hands, he knew he was looking at something unprecedented. "This can't be right," he whispered to himself, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses for the third time. The computer screen displayed two blood samples side by side. Sample A belonged to Elena Rodriguez, the 41-year-old real estate mogul who had graciously participated in the hospital's blood donation campaign that morning. Sample B belonged to Lucas Martinez, a 16-year-old patient in the pediatric oncology ward. The genetic markers were identical in ways that should have been impossible. 41 years of practice, and I've never seen anything like this, Dr. Hayes muttered, his voice barely audible in the quiet laboratory. The blood samples show a direct genetic match. Parent-child compatibility. But according to our records, Elena Rodriguez has never had children, and Lucas Martinez was abandoned at an orphanage 16 years ago. Elena Rodriguez stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, surveying the city sprawl below. At 41, she commanded a real estate empire worth over $3 billion. Rodriguez Development Corporation had transformed the skyline of three major cities, and Elena's name appeared on Forbes' Most Powerful Women list for the 7th consecutive year. But success had come at a price. Elena had never married, never had children, never allowed herself the luxury of emotional attachments that might compromise her focus. Her assistant knocked softly on the door. "Ms. Rodriguez," the hospital called. "They need you to return for some follow-up on your blood donation this morning." Elena frowned. She had participated in the blood drive at Mercy General Hospital purely as a public relations move. Rodriguez Development had funded the new pediatric wing, and appearing at the blood donation campaign provided excellent photo opportunities for the company's quarterly report. "Tell them to schedule it for next week," Elena replied without turning from the window. "They said it was urgent, ma'am. The doctor specifically requested that you come in today." Elena's jaw tightened. She had a board meeting in 2 hours and a conference call with investors in Tokyo immediately afterward. Her schedule was precisely calibrated, with no room for unexpected interruptions. "Fine. Reschedule the Martinez meeting for tomorrow morning." An hour later, Elena sat across from Dr. Hayes in his cramped office, her posture rigid with barely controlled impatience. The doctor's nervous energy was palpable as he shuffled through a stack of papers, clearly struggling with how to begin the conversation. "Ms. Rodriguez, I want to thank you again for participating in our blood drive. Your company's support means everything to this hospital. Dr. Hayes, I have a very tight schedule." "You said this was urgent?" The doctor cleared his throat and leaned forward, his expression growing serious. "Ms. Rodriguez, your blood test results have revealed something extraordinary. Something I've never encountered in my 4 decades of practice." Elena's fingers drummed impatiently against the arm of her chair. "Is there a health issue I should know about?" "No, your health is perfect." "But..." Dr. Hayes paused, seemingly gathering courage. "Your blood sample shows a genetic match with one of our patients. A perfect match, actually. The kind we typically only see between immediate family members." Elena's drumming fingers stopped. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "The genetic markers in your blood are identical to those of a 16-year-old patient in our pediatric oncology ward. The compatibility suggests a parent-child relationship." The room seemed to tilt around Elena. Her carefully constructed world, built on absolute control and predictability, suddenly felt unstable. "That's impossible. I've never had children." Dr. Hayes nodded sympathetically. "I understand your confusion. But the science doesn't lie. These results indicate that you and this patient share a direct genetic connection. In medical terms, there's a 99.9% probability that you are this child's biological mother." Elena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "This is ridiculous. There's obviously been some kind of mistake. You've mixed up samples or contaminated something." "We've run the tests 3 times, Dr. Hayes said gently. Each time, the results are identical. Elena's mind raced, searching for logical explanations. Who is this patient? What's their name? Lucas Martinez. He's 16 years old, and he's been fighting leukemia for the past 8 months. He was brought to us through the state foster care system. The name meant nothing to Elena, but something cold and sharp twisted in her stomach. Foster care. 16 years old. The timeline was possible. I need to see his medical records, Elena said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her thoughts. Ms. Rodriguez, patient confidentiality prevents me from sharing detailed medical information. But I can tell you that Lucas was admitted to our care 8 months ago when his condition was discovered during a routine health screening at his group home. Elena's business mind immediately began calculating. 16 years ago, she would have been 25. Fresh out of business school, working 80-hour weeks to establish her first development project. Those years were a blur of ambition, late nights, and ruthless focus on building her career. But there had been that one period, that 3-month gap in her memory that she had always attributed to stress and overwork. Dr. Hayes, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is Lucas in serious condition? The doctor's expression grew grave. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. It's an aggressive form of cancer that affects the blood and bone marrow. Lucas has been responding to treatment, but his condition is critical. He needs a bone marrow transplant, and finding a compatible donor has been challenging. Elena felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. And my blood, would I be compatible as a donor? Based on these genetic markers, you would likely be a perfect match. In fact, you might be his best hope for survival. The weight of this revelation pressed down on Elena like a physical force. A child she had never known existed was fighting for his life, and she might be the key to saving him. But accepting this reality would mean confronting a past she had deliberately buried and acknowledging a connection that could unravel everything she had built. I need to think about this, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Of course. But Ms. Rodriguez, time is a factor here. Lucas's condition is deteriorating, and the sooner we can proceed with a transplant, the better his chances. Elena nodded mechanically and stood to leave. As she reached the door, Dr. Hayes called after her. Ms. Rodriguez? Would you like to meet him? Elena's hand froze on the door handle. Meeting Lucas would make this real in ways that medical reports and test results could not. It would transform him from an abstract concept into a living, breathing person with a face and a voice and needs that she might be responsible for meeting. Not yet, she said without turning around. I need time to process this. Elena drove through the city streets in a daze, her usual aggressive navigation replaced by uncertain meandering. She found herself pulling into the parking lot of a small diner she had never noticed before, seeking refuge in anonymity. Inside, she ordered coffee she didn't want and sat in a corner booth, staring blankly out the window. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from her assistant, reminders about meetings and calls and decisions that needed to be made. But for the first time in her adult life, Elena Rodriguez felt completely paralyzed. A child. She might have a child. The thought was so foreign, so incompatible with her self-image, that she struggled to process it. Elena had built her identity around being untethered, uncompromised by the emotional complications that seemed to derail other successful women. She had watched colleagues sacrifice career advancement for family obligations and had congratulated herself on avoiding such distractions. But now, faced with the possibility that she had unknowingly abandoned a child 16 years ago, Elena was forced to confront the choices she had made and the life she had constructed around those choices. Her phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. It was her assistant. Ms. Rodriguez, the Tokyo investors are asking about the rescheduled call. Should I move it to this evening? Elena stared at her reflection in the diner window. For the first time, she noticed lines around her eyes, gray threads in her dark hair. Signs of a life spent in relentless pursuit of success, with little attention paid to the cost. Cancel it, she said. Ma'am? Cancel the call. Cancel the rest of my meetings today. I need to. I need to handle something personal. There was a pause on the other end of the line. In Elena's 20-year career, she had never canceled meetings for personal reasons. She had worked through illnesses, holidays, and family emergencies with equal determination. Of course, Ms. Rodriguez. Should I reschedule for tomorrow? I'll let you know. Elena ended the call and sat in the diner until the dinner crowd began to arrive. Only then did she realize she had been there for 4 hours, lost in thoughts that led nowhere and everywhere at once. As darkness fell over the city, Elena found herself driving back to Mercy General Hospital. She sat in the parking lot for another hour, watching the lit windows of the pediatric wing where Lucas Martinez was fighting for his life. Fighting alone, without family, without anyone who shared his genetic code and understood the weight of that connection. Finally, Elena pulled out her phone and called Dr. Hayes. Doctor, it's Elena Rodriguez. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. If I am this child's biological mother, if the tests are correct, what would that mean for his treatment? What would it mean for him as a person to learn this information? Dr. Hayes was quiet for a moment. From a medical standpoint, having a genetic match would dramatically improve his chances of survival. The bone marrow transplant procedure would have a much higher success rate with a related donor. And emotionally? That's harder to predict. Lucas has been in the foster care system since he was an infant. He's never known his biological parents. Learning that his mother is alive and capable of helping him, it could provide hope and motivation for his recovery. Or it could raise questions and emotions that complicate his healing process. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. What kind of person is he? This boy? He's remarkable, honestly. Despite everything he's been through, Lucas maintains an optimistic outlook. He's intelligent, curious about the world. He reads constantly and asks thoughtful questions about his treatment. The nursing staff adores him. And he's alone? No foster family, no one visiting? He's been in a group home for the past 2 years. The staff there care about him, but they have limited resources and many children to supervise. His social worker visits occasionally, but Lucas spends most of his time here at the hospital by himself. The image of a 16-year-old boy facing cancer alone struck Elena with unexpected force. She had always prided herself on her emotional control, her ability to make decisions based on logic rather than sentiment. But something about this situation bypassed her usual defenses. Dr. Hayes, if I were to meet him, how would you suggest we handle it? Carefully. We could start with a brief introduction, perhaps without immediately revealing the genetic connection. Let you both get a sense of each other before sharing the test results. Elena nodded, though the doctor couldn't see her. Schedule it for tomorrow morning. And doctor? Yes? Don't tell him who I am yet. I need to see him first, to understand what we're dealing with before we change his entire world. The next morning, Elena stood outside room 314 in the pediatric oncology ward, her palms sweating despite the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. She had arrived at 7 a.m., 2 hours before her scheduled meeting with Dr. Hayes, driven by an urgency she couldn't name. Through the small window in the door, she could see Lucas Martinez for the first time. He was smaller than she had expected, made fragile by illness and treatment. His head was covered by a knit cap, and 4 lines snaked from his arm to a bag of clear fluid hanging beside his bed. But his eyes were alert and focused as he read from a thick paperback novel. Elena studied his face, searching for familiar features. The shape of his nose might have been hers. The set of his jaw definitely reminded her of her own father. But it was impossible to be certain. 16 years of life and 8 months of illness had shaped him into his own person, distinct from whatever genetic legacy she might have provided. Ms. Rodriguez? Elena turned to find Dr. Hayes approaching, accompanied by a young woman in scrubs. This is Sarah Chen, Lucas's primary nurse. I thought it might be helpful for her to introduce you, since she knows him best. Nurse Chen smiled warmly. Lucas is awake and feeling relatively well today. He's been looking forward to meeting you, though he's not sure why exactly a business lady wants to visit him. Elena's throat felt tight. What did you tell him? Just that a donor from yesterday's blood drive wanted to meet some of the patients who might benefit from the donations. It's not uncommon for philanthropists to visit the wards. Elena nodded, grateful for the simple explanation. She followed Nurse Chen into the room, her heart pounding with an intensity she hadn't experienced since her first major business presentation. Lucas, I'd like you to meet Elena Rodriguez. She participated in our blood drive yesterday and wanted to meet some of our patients. Lucas looked up from his book, and Elena felt her breath catch. Up close, the resemblance was unmistakable. He had her dark eyes, her father's stubborn chin, and something in his expression that reminded her powerfully of her own teenage years. Hi, Lucas said, setting aside his book and attempting to sit up straighter. Thank you for donating blood. That's really cool of you. Elena moved closer to his bed, unsure of the appropriate distance. Hello, Lucas. How are you feeling today? Pretty good, actually. The chemo makes me tired, but today's not too bad. He gestured to his book. I'm reading this amazing novel about space exploration. Do you like science fiction? The question caught Elena off guard. In her world of board meetings and profit margins, no one ever asked about her reading preferences. I used to. When I was younger. What was your favorite book? Elena searched her memory for titles she had loved before business consumed her life. Probably The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. I read it when I was about your age. Lucas's eyes lit up. That's an incredible book. The way she explores gender and society, it's so ahead of its time. Have you read any of her other works? Elena found herself drawn into a conversation unlike any she'd had in years. Lucas was thoughtful and articulate, asking probing questions about the themes in Le Guin's work and sharing his own interpretations. For 20 minutes, she forgot about test results and genetic matches and simply enjoyed talking with an intelligent young person about books and ideas. I'm sorry, Lucas said eventually, noticing Elena checking her watch. I'm probably keeping you from important business stuff. No, Elena said quickly. This has been really nice. I don't get to talk about books very often anymore. What kind of work do you do? Real estate development. I build office buildings and shopping centers, mostly. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. That must be really satisfying, creating spaces where people work and shop and live their lives. Like, you're helping shape how a city grows and changes. Elena was surprised by his perspective. Most people either dismissed her work as purely profit-driven or expressed vague admiration for her success. But Lucas seemed genuinely interested in the human impact of what she did. I've never thought about it quite that way, she admitted. My social worker says I think about things too much, Lucas said with a slight smile. But being stuck in here gives me a lot of time to think. Elena felt a stab of something that might have been guilt or sadness. Do you get lonely here? Lucas shrugged, a gesture that tried to seem casual but didn't quite succeed. Sometimes. But the nurses are really nice, and I have my books. And Dr. Hayes says I might be able to go back to school if the treatment keeps working. You're not in school now? Not regular school. I have a tutor who comes twice a week, but it's not the same as being with other kids my age. Elena realized that while she had been building her empire, accumulating wealth and recognition, this boy had been fighting battles she couldn't imagine. And if the test results were correct, she bore some responsibility for the circumstances that had led him here. Lucas, she said carefully, do you ever wonder about your biological parents? About where you came from? His expression grew more guarded. Sometimes. But I try not to think about it too much. My social worker says they probably had good reasons for giving me up. What do you imagine they were like? Lucas considered the question seriously. I used to think they were probably young and scared. Maybe they didn't have enough money to take care of a baby. I hope they went on to have good lives, you know? I hope they don't feel bad about their decision." The generosity in his response nearly undid Elena. Here was a boy who had grown up without parents, who was now facing a life-threatening illness alone, and he was concerned about the emotional well-being of the people who had abandoned him. "You're a remarkable young man," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't hide. "Thanks. You're pretty cool, too, for a business lady." Lucas grinned, and Elena caught a glimpse of the person he might become if given the chance to recover and grow up. Nurse Chen appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Lucas needs to rest before his next treatment." Elena nodded and stood to leave. As she reached the door, Lucas called after her. "Ms. Rodriguez? Will you come back and visit me again? I'd like to hear more about those buildings you create." Elena turned back to look at him, this boy who might be her son, who was facing impossible odds with grace and curiosity and hope. "Yes," she said. "I'll come back soon." In the hallway, Dr. Hayes was waiting for her. "How did it go?" Elena struggled to find words for what she had experienced. He's incredible. Intelligent and thoughtful and kind. And he's facing all of this alone. So what do you want to do?" Elena looked back toward Lucas's room, where she could see him settling back into his bed with his book. For the first time in her adult life, a decision that had nothing to do with profit margins or market analysis felt absolutely clear. "I want to help him. I want to be tested as a donor. And I want to tell him the truth about who I am." Dr. Hayes nodded. "Are you prepared for how that might change both of your lives?" Elena thought about her carefully ordered existence, her pristine penthouse apartment, her calendar full of meetings and acquisitions and strategic planning sessions. All of it felt suddenly hollow compared to the possibility of saving this boy's life and perhaps finding a kind of meaning she had never known existed. "I've spent 20 years building a business empire," she said. "Maybe it's time I built something more important." The bone marrow donation procedure was scheduled for the following week, but Elena found herself returning to the hospital every day in the interim. She told herself she was simply ensuring that Lucas was receiving the best possible care, but the truth was more complicated. Each visit revealed new layers of Lucas's personality. He was fascinated by architecture and urban planning, asking detailed questions about her development projects. He had strong opinions about environmental sustainability and social responsibility in business. He drew sketches of futuristic cityscapes in the margins of his schoolbooks. "You know," Lucas said during one of their conversations, "if I get better, I think I'd like to study architecture. I want to design buildings that help communities instead of just making money." Elena felt a strange pride in his ambition, mixed with sadness that she had missed 16 years of watching his interests develop. "That's a wonderful goal. Have you thought about which schools you might want to attend?" "I probably can't afford college," Lucas said matter-of-factly. "But maybe I could get scholarships if my grades are good enough." "Lucas," Elena said carefully, "what if cost wasn't a factor? What if someone wanted to help you pursue your education?" He looked at her suspiciously. "You're not just being nice, are you? Because I've learned not to get my hopes up about stuff like that." The comment revealed the protective walls Lucas had built around his dreams, and Elena realized how carefully he managed his expectations to avoid disappointment. She wondered how many promises had been broken in his 16 years, how many potential opportunities had failed to materialize. "I'm not just being nice," she said. "I'm serious about helping." "Why?" Lucas asked directly. "You don't even know me." Elena felt the weight of secrets pressing down on her. In 3 days, she would donate bone marrow to save his life. After the procedure, Dr. Hayes planned to reveal the genetic connection that made the transplant possible. But sitting here with Lucas, watching him try to reconcile unexpected kindness with his learned caution, Elena realized that the truth couldn't wait. "Lucas, there's something I need to tell you. Something important about why I've been visiting you." His expression grew wary, the openness of the past week replaced by the careful guardedness of a child who had learned that adults often delivered disappointing news disguised as gifts. "What is it?" Elena took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change both of their lives irrevocably. The blood test I took during the donation drive, it revealed something unexpected. Something about my connection to you. Lucas waited, his dark eyes fixed on her face. The test showed that we share a genetic relationship. According to the medical analysis, there's a very high probability that I'm your biological mother. The silence that followed felt eternal. Lucas stared at her, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been hope before settling into careful neutrality. That's not possible, he said finally. My biological mother was probably a teenager who couldn't take care of me. You're successful and rich and... I was 25 16 years ago, Elena said gently. I was working incredibly long hours, completely focused on building my career. There's a period of time from that year that I don't remember clearly due to stress and exhaustion. Lucas shook his head. But you would remember having a baby. You would remember me. Elena felt tears threatening, an emotion she had trained herself not to display in professional settings. But this wasn't professional. This was the most personal conversation of her life. I think something happened that I blocked out. Something traumatic that I convinced myself didn't occur. Dr. Hayes thinks it's possible that I gave birth during a period when I was experiencing severe stress and memory issues. So you just forgot about me? Lucas's voice carried a pain that cut through Elena's chest like a blade. I think I had to forget in order to function, Elena said, the words coming out as a whisper. I think remembering would have broken me, so my mind protected me by hiding the truth. Lucas turned away from her, staring out the hospital window at the city skyline. Elena could see his shoulders shaking slightly, and she realized he was crying. Lucas. I used to imagine what my mother was like, he said without turning around. I thought maybe she was young and scared. Or maybe she was sick and couldn't take care of me. I never thought she just forgot I existed. Elena stood and moved closer to his bed, every instinct telling her to comfort him but uncertainty about whether he would accept her touch. I'm so sorry. I know how inadequate that sounds, but I am truly, deeply sorry for the years I wasn't there. Why now? Lucas asked, finally looking at her again. Why do you want to be my mother now? The question forced Elena to examine her own motivations. Was this guilt? Obligation? Or something deeper and more genuine? Because meeting you has shown me what I've been missing, she said honestly. Because you're remarkable and brave and intelligent, and you deserve to have someone in your life who sees all of that and wants to support your dreams. And because you need me to save your life, she added quietly. The bone marrow transplant has a much better chance of success with a genetic match. Lucas nodded slowly. So you're doing this partly because I'm sick. I'm doing this because you're my son, Elena said, the words feeling strange but right in her mouth. And because I want to make up for 16 years of absence, even though I know that might be impossible. They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. Finally, Lucas spoke. What happens now? After the transplant, I mean. Do you want me to come live with you? Do you want to be a regular mom? Elena realized she hadn't thought beyond the medical procedure. Her entire adult life had been structured around independence and professional achievement. The idea of reorganizing her existence around a teenager's needs felt overwhelming and terrifying. But looking at Lucas, seeing the vulnerability beneath his careful composure, Elena felt something shift inside her. A protective instinct she had never experienced, a willingness to sacrifice her comfort for his well-being. I want to try, she said. I want to learn how to be your mother, if you'll let me. I know I have a lot to learn, and I know I've made terrible mistakes. But I want to try. Lucas studied her face, searching for sincerity or deception. What about your work? Your company? Work will have to adapt, Elena said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. You're more important than any business deal. I've never had a real family, Lucas said softly. I don't know how to do it either. Then we'll figure it out together. Lucas was quiet for another long moment before reaching out to take her hand. His fingers were thin from illness, but his grip was firm. "Okay," he said. "Let's try." The bone marrow transplant procedure took place on a Tuesday morning in early October. Elena had never experienced anything more physically demanding or emotionally intense than the process of having marrow extracted from her hip bones while knowing that her genetic material might save her son's life. She spent the recovery period in a room down the hall from Lucas, both of them connected to monitors and 4 lines, both fighting their own battles against pain and uncertainty. But for the first time since learning of his existence, Elena felt like they were facing something together. Dr. Hayes visited them both frequently during the first week post-transplant, monitoring Lucas's body for signs that it was accepting the donated marrow. The process could take weeks or months, and there was always the possibility of rejection or complications. "How are you feeling today?" Elena asked Lucas during one of her visits to his room. She was walking more steadily now, the surgical pain gradually subsiding. "Different," Lucas said thoughtfully. "Not better yet, but different. Like something is changing inside me. Dr. Hayes says that's normal. Your body is learning to work with the new cells." Lucas nodded, then looked at her with an expression she was learning to recognize as his serious, thinking face. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think we would have found each other if I hadn't gotten sick? If the blood drive hadn't happened?" Elena considered the question honestly. "I don't know. I might have continued living my life without ever knowing you existed. The thought of that terrifies me now. Sometimes I think getting cancer was worth it, if it brought us together," Lucas said quietly. "Don't say that," Elena replied firmly. "Don't ever think that suffering was necessary for good things to happen. We should have found each other sooner, and we should have found each other under better circumstances. But we didn't. So maybe this was the only way." Elena reached for his hand, a gesture that was becoming natural between them. "What matters is that we found each other at all. And that we're going to make the most of whatever time we have together." 3 weeks after the transplant, Dr. Hayes delivered the news they had been hoping for. Lucas's blood work showed clear signs that the donor marrow was engrafting successfully. His white blood cell count was rising, and his body was beginning to produce healthy new blood cells. "This is very encouraging," Dr. Hayes said, unable to hide his excitement. "If this progress continues, Lucas should be able to go home within the next month." Home. The word raised questions that Elena and Lucas had been avoiding during his recovery. Elena's penthouse apartment was designed for one person living a highly organized, professional life. It had no space for a teenager's belongings, no consideration for the needs of a recovering patient. "I've been thinking," Elena said to Lucas that afternoon. "Maybe we should look for a new place. Somewhere that belongs to both of us, rather than trying to fit you into my existing life." Lucas's eyes widened. "You would move for me?" "I would do anything for you," Elena said, realizing as she spoke that the words were completely true. "Besides, it's time for me to start living somewhere that feels like a home instead of just a place to sleep between business trips." They spent the following weeks looking at apartments and houses, with Lucas participating from his hospital bed via video calls. Elena was amazed by his thoughtful input about layouts and neighborhoods, his consideration of practical details she would never have considered. "This one has good light for reading," he observed about a brownstone with large windows. "And there's a park across the street where I could go running when I'm stronger." Elena made an offer on the brownstone that afternoon. As Lucas's discharge date approached, Elena found herself redesigning her entire life around his needs and interests. She hired a tutor to help him catch up on the schoolwork he had missed. She researched the best high schools in their new neighborhood. She bought books on parenting teenagers and nutrition for cancer survivors. "You know," her assistant commented during one of their planning sessions, "I've never seen you this energized about anything that wasn't related to a major acquisition." Elena looked up from the stack of college preparatory programs she was researching. "I'm discovering that some things are more important than business success." On the day Lucas was finally released from the hospital, Elena drove him to their new home in the brownstone. His belongings from the group home filled 2 small suitcases, a reminder of how little he had accumulated in 16 years of temporary placements. "This is really ours?" he asked as they stood in the sunny living room with its built-in bookshelves and comfortable reading chairs. "This is really ours," Elena confirmed. "And Lucas?" "It's okay if it takes time to feel like home. We're both learning how to do this." Lucas walked through the house slowly, examining each room with the careful attention Elena was learning to recognize as characteristic of someone who had learned not to take stability for granted. In the bedroom they had prepared for him, he stopped at the desk positioned beneath a large window. "I could do homework here," he said wonderingly. "I could have a place for all my books." Elena felt tears threatening again, still unaccustomed to the emotional intensity that seemed to accompany every interaction with her son. "You can have anything you want here. This is your home." Lucas turned to face her, and Elena saw something in his expression that she had never seen before. Not the careful hope he had shown in the hospital, or the cautious trust that had developed during their conversations. This was something deeper and more secure. "Thank you," he said simply. "For saving my life. For giving me a home. For wanting to be my mom." Elena crossed the room and pulled him into a hug, still awkward with the physical expressions of affection that seemed to come naturally to other parents but felt revolutionary to her. "Thank you for letting me try." That evening, as they sat together in their living room reading books in comfortable silence, Elena reflected on how completely her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had defined success by her company's quarterly earnings and her personal net worth. She had measured her days by meetings attended and deals closed. Now, success meant Lucas's steady recovery, his growing confidence, the way he had started calling her mom without self-consciousness. It meant creating a home where he felt safe enough to dream about the future. Elena looked over at Lucas, who was sprawled in his reading chair with a book about sustainable architecture balanced on his chest. His color had returned, and he had gained weight during his recovery. Dr. Hayes was optimistic about his long-term prognosis. "Lucas," she said softly. "Yeah? I want you to know that finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not just because you needed help, but because you've shown me what really matters." Lucas smiled, the expression transforming his face from serious student to the teenager he was finally getting the chance to be. "I love you too, Mom." The words hit Elena with a force that surprised her. In her business life, she had negotiated billion-dollar deals without showing emotion. But hearing her son say he loved her broke through every defense she had constructed around her heart. "I love you too," she whispered back, meaning it with every cell of her being, including the ones that had saved his life. As the months passed, Elena and Lucas developed routines that felt increasingly natural. Morning coffee and planning for the day. Afternoon check-ins about school and work. Evening conversations about books, current events, and Lucas's expanding dreams for his future. Elena had restructured her role at Rodriguez Development, stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategic planning and major projects. She discovered that her company functioned perfectly well without her constant oversight, and that she was actually more effective when she wasn't trying to control every detail. Lucas thrived in his new school, making friends and excelling in his architecture and engineering classes. His teachers were impressed by his maturity and his thoughtful approach to problem solving. "Mom," he said one evening as they were cooking dinner together, "I've been thinking about college applications." Elena looked up from the vegetables she was chopping. "Oh? And what have you decided?" "I want to study sustainable architecture. I want to design buildings that help communities and protect the environment. Like what you do, but with a focus on social responsibility." Elena felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with her own achievements. "That sounds perfect. Have you looked at specific programs?" "A few. But I was wondering, would you help me with the applications? I know you're good at presenting ideas and making cases for things." Elena set down her knife and turned to face him fully. "Lucas, I would be honored to help you with your college applications. In fact, I can't think of anything I'd rather do." Lucas grinned, and Elena was struck again by how much joy she found in his happiness. Thanks, Mom. I really want to make you proud. Lucas, Elena said seriously, you already make me proud every single day. Not because of your grades or your plans for the future, but because of who you are.